Good afternoon. I was saying that it would be a great challenge for any speaker to keep the attention of the uh, audience, especially after the good lunch, which had 3 sweet dishes in it. So I hope I make justice to your time and keep your interest intact. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my topic. The topic today of my presentation is DFU or differential equation. I know there are a lot of engineers here as well as the technocrats. So before I go to my presentation, I would like to give a brief background about us. We are Healthium. Healthium MedTech is a medical device company, and we are proud to say that 1 in 5 devices used in the medical device industry, medical devices in the industry is made out of Healthium. We are globally present with more than 64 patents and 8 manufacturing sites, and we are very proud of our achievement. So differential equation in mathematics means it relates one or more unknown with their derivatives. So there is a function that is a physical quantity, and there is a derivative which is the rate of change of that function. So there is a physical quantity, and then there is a rate of change of that quantity, and then equation that links to it is called as a differential equation. So in our real life, what we do is we take a small abstract, put it into a mathematical model, try to find a solution and apply it real life, and then this keeps on going. Okay. So this is something called as differential equation, and this plays a prominent role in every discipline. And my attempt here is to bring to your attention that diabetic foot ulcer is a differential equation. If I say it's a simple differential equation, dy dx is a function of x. So in plain medical terms, I can put it like wound healing is a function of cell damage. Or if I put it in a second degree, that it is a function of function of x and y. That means I can say it is a function of cell damage or a function of infection both together. Or if I want to make it a still complex equation, I can say it is a function of initial cell damage and the rate of cell damage plus the initial infection plus the rate of infection. The initial is at the time 0. So the point that I am trying to make here is diabetic wound is a function of many variables and many interplays of the variables, many interactions of first degree with them, second degree with them, and the interactions of the interactions within them. So I will take a small time of yours to first go through the basics of this. See, diabetic mellitus is attributed to 3 major causes or aspects. One is the prolonged hypoglycemia, then there is a diabetic peripheral neuropathy and peripheral arterial disease. That means the nerve system is not supporting, it is not sending the signal to the brain, it is not repairing as well, and then there is no sufficient blood flow to the system, which is bringing you nutrients and oxygen. So prolonged hypoglycemia has its own causes which cause a lot of disorders, and then it leads to the diabetic wound. Or if you call as neuropathy, it is also having 3 aspects of it. It can be sensory, motor or autonomous. Means you can have a loss of protective sensation, or there can be a bone deformation, or there can be a drying and no repair of the skin that is happening, that is causing the tear there. And then there is peripheral arterial diseases where the blood vessels are clotted or clogged, where the oxygen is not able to reach the organ and the wound is not able to heal properly. So all this contribute to a diabetic foot ulcer. So when we say that a solution to a diabetic foot ulcer, it cannot be a one-way solution to a diabetic foot ulcer. There is not a single short solution to diabetic foot ulcer. All these play an intermediary role or complicating roles, interactive roles, and that is why we call diabetic foot ulcers as a differential equation. So whatever I have presented as an engineer or as a technologist, these are some of the interlying factors into the wound, these are the markers into the wound which anyone would be of interest. If you are designing anything with related to diabetic treatment, diabetic foot treatment, you should know that these are the elements these are the factors that you can measure or count, or they are responsible, and if you are able to track them, you will be able to track some of the indications of the wounds healing, non-healing, or getting into the other tracks of not healing. So if I'm putting a small demographics of statistics, which is a very recent statistics published in
Recording
2022.
stopped.
We have type 1 and type 2 diabetes. 90% of the patients are belonging to type 2 diabetes. Out of that, 6.4% develop a diabetic foot ulcer, whereas only 10% patients are type 1 diabetes, which is a severe diabetes where your pancreas is not producing the insulin, and 5.5%, that means 55% of the type 1 diabetic patients would encounter a diabetic foot. So in short, today if you see the 10% of the world's population, that is 537 million people are infected with diabetes, and there is an estimate saying that it would reach to 783 by 2045. So around 30% of the diabetic patients encounter foot diseases at some stage of their life. So this is such a big problem, but we are less aware of that, because when this awareness comes, we are in a very later stage of the wound, and there is a lot of scope has gone. So early diagnostics, early detection, food checking, all those you would have heard in the prior sessions, they are of very much importance here. So in the stages of wound healing, if you see, I take out hemostasis because these are all chronic or diabetic wounds which are caused by some stages. At the very initial, hemostasis won't be there much, but inflammatory and proliferative stages are the more common stages, and those markers that are put like pre-inflammatory cytokines, MMPs, or macrophages 1, neutrophils, reactive, these are the parameters of importance for us, because as the technologists who are devising smart or next generation dressings, we should be able to track those variables and see what is the interplay within them. Same way in the proliferation or the remolding phase, there are other like M2 macrophages, wound healing growth factors, and so on. See, the difference between an acute wound and a diabetic wound is majorly the wound gets locked in the inflammatory phase for a longer period of time, and the body is not able to push it to the proliferative and remolding phase. So if we can tune the body, or you can give a signal to the body that push it to the next phase, proliferation or remolding phase, by making the situations or conditions conducive at the wound site, then probably the wound will heal faster. And this is the basic belief with which we progress in our development of new technologies. So I am just going to touch very briefly about what are the technologies that we are working today, or what are that our competitors or something similar that is being worked out, which is not being practiced at present but can be the technologies of future. So one is the antimicrobial polypeptides or peptides, AMPs that we call as. This is a very promising field. You see, antimicrobial peptides are the part of our innate biological immune system, which has a lot of antimicrobial characteristics. When I mean antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, and all those microorganisms are tackled by this. So the basic mechanism with which these AMPs kill is either they rupture the cell wall, or then they go into the intracellular components and then break it. Mostly the cell wall rupture happens. So the most important characteristics of this is they don't cause the bacteria to go into a strain that is more adaptive or more resistant to the antimicrobial action. So this is causing, this is building a very much huge interest, and we are working on these technologies. A lot of things are happening in this phase. If you see, wound irrigation with antiseptics or antibiotics is very commonly carried out as a general practice, but there are evidences that says that if you are able to irrigate the wound, and then over a period of time the microbes are adaptive to this, at the same time the cell mitosis is affected. When cell mitosis is affected, that means the cell is not able to multiply. So there is an emphasis on trying to bring antiseptics or creams or technology which is not interfering into the mitosis of the cell. So we are working on that. There is a phage therapy, you may be all aware. There are certain viruses that are able to tackle the bacteria. So if we are able to introduce certain viruses into the wound which are not infective to the human cells in general, and are able to tackle those bacterial strains, then we will be able to take out those bacterial infections very easily without causing harm as a collateral damage to the body. Then there are certain things that we are working at present is photodynamic therapy, wherein you will have a cream that is applied which is a photosensitive cream, and then you are exposing it to the a particular wavelength of light, and that wavelength of light will excite the photosensitive cream, and then that will create a reactive oxygen species, and that reactive oxygen species in turn is able to take care of the microorganism. So a ground state, zero state energy getting excited to the higher energy, and that energy has been utilized either to break the peroxides to oxygen in nascent oxygen, or then the oxygen is broken to singlet oxygens, which causes the antimicrobial action. This is a very promising thing that we are working at present on. Then there is non-thermal plasma that is also been tried. So you know, plasma is a medium. This is the fourth state of matter, which is composed of high energy elements like charged particles, electron, ions, and so many things. There are studies which shows that if you are exposing the wound to a plasma treatment, it not only causes decontamination of the wound, but also heals the wound very faster. Of course, none of this is none of this product is in the market. They are all in the clinical stage, first stage, second stage, or preclinical stage. There is also a very good studies that are being conducted all over, where electrical simulation is given to the wound, and there are a lot of studies done, and pulsated manner the simulation is given. So that the pulses that I have presented here are some of the examples of pulsation patterns, but these patterns have caused a lot of growth enhancement into the wound, and the wound closure was seen to be very faster. These are very, very nascent stage technologies, wherein the future will come something derived out of that. Then there are some alternate inhibiting bacterial adhesion or biofilm technologies that are there. So before I go to that technology, you should understand that the bacteria present in the wound, especially the chronic infected wound, would not be the planktonic bacteria. So planktonic bacteria, you all know, are free-flowing bacteria here and there. They are generally planktonic when they originate, but then what happens is they form big colonies, and the colonies are surrounded by extracellular matrix, and that causes it to be called as a biofilm, the slimy layer of extracellular matrix that the bacteria was once very easily able to be eliminated by a regular antiseptic or antibiotic, would not be able to do this now, because there is a protective layer on top of it. So these planktonic bacteria are again created by rupture of those biofilms, and this cycle keeps on continuing. So if there is an inhibition of the initial bacteria adhesion, and there is a finding that if there are presence of metal ions like calcium or iron or magnesium, the bacteria's adhesion increase. So there is a lot of research going on. Can we chelate those into the wound? So some of the initial chelators like EDTA and all those are being tried, wherein if I can chelate them, I will be able to take care of the bacterial adhesion. If there is no bacterial adhesion, then it will not progress into the bacterial biofilm form. Similarly, there is something called as quorum sensing in the bacteria. You know, the bacteria are able to communicate with the other bacterial colonies or the single bacteria, saying here is a danger, please don't come, or here there is a lot of food, please come, something similar like that. It may not be as plain as this language what I am speaking, but it will be a language something similar to this, in a very encoded form. So if we can interrupt that quorum sensing, and then the bacterial communication won't be there, and if there is no bacterial communication, then probably there is no colonization of the wound to the extent that would happen in the absence of this. There is also something called as exopolysaccharides that we are trying, which means that polysaccharides are derived from the bacterial extracts, which are able to cause the natural polysaccharides to be disrupted. Then there are certain stress signals. If the bacteria is starving or is deprived of something very essential, it gives a signal which is called as alarmone, in the form of alarmone. If we can capture those alarmones, and there are studies that there are certain compounds capture alarmones, then we will not be able to have the bacterial colonization to the extent that is possible. All these technologies or techniques are with non-interfering onto the regular wound cycle or regular healing of the wound, so that the resistance don't build. We are also working on something called as smart dressings. So smart dressings, I mean, in the very opening session, Dr. Armstrong had stressed upon that therapeutic plus diagnostic is theranostics. This is the future of tomorrow. But as the engineers or all the technologists here, these are some of the initial things, but you should understand we can either track the inflammation, or can track the bacterial composition, or can track the wound regeneration, and these are some of the parameters that I can measure. So if you see, very important parameter is the pH of the wound. And in some of the speakers in the initial session had covered this, but I would just want to bring to your attention that a general acute wound will raise into its pH level and then drop and come to a very normal pH level. Whereas the chronic wounds like the diabetic foot ulcer, once they go into a higher pH level, they don't come back. And that is an indication that the wound is in a chronic stage, or that is an indication that the wound has gone into a chronic stage and the inflammation is continuing. So if we are able to measure the pH of the wound in a real time, and then we will be able to predict, saying that whether my treatment is making sense or whether my wound now is gone beyond the regular phase of healing and locked into an inflammatory stage, before I could see the indications of inflammation, so that I can tune my treatment accordingly. So if you see, this is the graph which I was trying to explain to you. In a normal acute wound, it will rise and then come to a normal level, whereas in the diabetic foot ulcer chronic wounds, it won't come to a normal level. So there are a lot of studies that are going at present. Can I read the pH in real time? Can I monitor it? And will that lead for me, give me a prior leads? And I remember I had a lot of discussions on that with Dr. Pawan, and I had shown him some of the prototypes that we are doing at present also. So when we say smart dressing, diagnostic dressing, I had stressed that there are so many parameters that you can check out. So at present pH, either you can have a definite electrode put into a wound dressing and measure the pH, or there is something called as encapsulation, wherein the encapsulation is done about the fluoropores, which gives specific colors, and you can see the colors of that. Now when I say there are electrodes, you may be surprised that, oh, how can we put an electronic circuit into the wound? But let me bring one small point to your notice, that today I can print a circuitry on a piece of cloth, aniline based electrodes or carbon based, aniline based electrodes I can print. They can be a small logo sort of thing, which will be able to act as an electrode of my dressing, and then they pass on the signal, and I am able to capture those signal and then process the data. So it need not have to be a real electronic circuitry built of a very hard material going into the wound. It need not have to be like that. So that is happening. Reactive oxygen species, you know, there are a lot of reactive oxygen species. There is a oxidative stress onto the wound. If I am able to capture those reactive oxidative stress, I will be able to predict what is happening to the wound or which side the wound is going. So today again with the macromolecules and the fluoropores, I am able to do that. Temperature I have already covered by an electrode, which can be a printed electrode as well. Then glucose levels at the site are also been measured by intermediary primer, where you can attach the glucose molecule and then glucose molecule can be measured. Same way, bacterial colonization or bacterial secretion can also be measured. Basically, bacteria release these lipase or hemolysins, and then you can be able to capture this, and it is possible. We are also able to do the stresses on the wound. The point is, we had a paper in the morning session where we could see there is a digital signature being captured where the bacterial load is present or not. But it is possible, but of course it was not interfering, it was remotely sensed. But this is something which is interfering, which cannot be remotely sensed. But there is a fair chances that I can categorize and capture what sort of bacterial infection it is when I have this thing with me. So maybe not today, but tomorrow, it may not be the immediate tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. This is where the technology is heading to. So maybe our generations, the offsprings and the doctors then use this type of dressing, then we should not be surprised. The technology is doing well in that field. So this also gives a lot of personalized medicine. See, there is not a standard of care set and encompassing all the patients with all varying attributes. I can have a standardized, personalized medicines done with this. And then this opens doors to the theranostic wound dressings, which is measuring and then trying to give the therapeutic assessment to the wound. So with this, I just take a small brief on saying one of the dressing of this series that we have brought is called as a Therapter. Therapter 3D hydrocellular matrix, which is a patch dressing. The basic principle is very simple. See, you cannot treat a diabetic foot ulcer by just taking the bacterial load. You cannot take you cannot cure the diabetic foot ulcer by just taking the exudate away. These are all interplaying fields. So what we believe is when you are taking the hyperglycemia into control, what is left onto the wound, I'll just take 2 minutes, what is left onto the wound is the load of the exudate, which is laced with a lot of enzymes and MMPs, and then the bacterial infection. So don't send any antibacterial into the wound. Similar to what I had explained on the proteins, you just kill them remotely. So we have a dressing which is having channels, just like this capillary action, it picks up the exudate and then it dries the exudate away by just taking the wicking action. So when it is doing something similar to this, what happens basically is it is able to attract, it is able to bind the pathogens, and it is able to rupture the pathogens that are coming along with the exudate. The exudate is continuously taken away from the wound bed and then dried. So a amount of debridement happens. So I'm taking the load of enzymes, MMPs away from the wound and then keeping the wound area sterile. I'm not doing anything else other than this. Rest other, the dressing is giving ample scope for the body to heal. That means if I'm able to take all the load from the wound in terms of exudate, the contents of the exudate, then what remains on the wound is the healthy layer that is not composing of enzymes or more of MMPs. And then there is an antibacterial action that is happening not in the wound, on the dressing. So it keeps the wound more of a sterile or the bacterial colonization point is much below in control and gives the body a normal healing time. So it does not interfere into the healing cycle by sending any foreign molecule inside, but it keeps the bacterial load in control. It takes away the exudate. Only these two simple things we have seen is able to give phenomenal healing into the wounds which were seen to be non-healing, especially in diabetic wounds. Very, very simple. Take the exudate away, ensure there is no build-up of load by a non-intrusive technology, which is a cationic technology. You kill the load into the wound dressing, not into the wound, because exudate will carry the bacterial load into the dressing and kill it there. So you are not adding any stress on the wound or not adding any cytotoxicology issues in this. There are a lot of papers published with this, and with this I express my sincere thanks for giving me this opportunity to present my work. Thank you very much.